Hello everyone and welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. This week, the first COVID-19 case in Africa has been reported in Egypt, making it even more real that countries have to step up efforts on prevention and prepare for even more cases. France, on the other hand, has announced the first death from COVID-19 from outside of China. While the WHO says China is on top of the situation, we'll examine how countries around the world and organizations have been responding. Our guest this week is a career diplomat who once served as ambassador to Ethiopia and to the African Union. Ambassador Olusegun Akinsanya joins us to talk about the impact of the coronavirus on governments and institutions. But first, we'd like to say our goodbye to late Ambassador Olufemi Fowora, a former Nigerian ambassador to the defunct Yugoslavia, among other assignments during his time as a career diplomat, who was last director of admin and finance in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He died on January 27, 2020, and will be buried this week at his home in Ijebu-Ode, Ogun State. 30 countries around the world have now reported cases of COVID-19. 30, that's if you count in China's special administrative regions, and about 28 or so without them, meaning the virus has been reported in almost every continent in the world. As of Saturday, February 15th, 1,527 deaths had been reported. 1,523 of them were in China. There was one in Hong Kong, there was one in the Philippines, one in Japan, and of course in France. Now, the World Health Organization says the virus is still an emergency for China, and it is impossible to tell where it will spread.
We're concerned by the continued increase in the number of cases in China. We're concerned by reports from China yesterday about the number of health workers who have been infected or died. We're concerned by the lack of urgency in funding the response from the international community. We're concerned about the severe disruption in the market for personal protective equipment, which is putting frontline health workers and carriers at risk. We're concerned about the levels of rumor and misinformation that are hampering the response. And most of all, we're concerned about the potential havoc this virus could wreak in countries with weaker health systems.
But there is a charge for world leaders on their handling of the health emergency.
The world spends billions of dollars preparing for a terrorist attack, but relatively little preparing for the attack of a virus, which could be far more deadly and far more damaging economically, politically, and socially. This is frankly difficult to understand and dangerously short-sighted.
China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that with China curing more than 8,000 cases of COVID-19 till date, it means the epidemic is controllable. He says, drawing from history, as civilization has struggled with disease, China quickly notified the world about the outbreak and shares the genetic consequence of the virus, confirming that cases outside of China account for less than 1% of the world's total, and praising his country for effectively curbing the outbreak beyond their borders. Countries around the world, including Nigeria, have been working and preparing for possible cases and claim to be ready should there be any. Apart from medical preparations, especially by the Lagos state government, even the Nigerian Immigration Service has been put on the ready. Countries like Norway say they're supporting the urgent global response to the outbreak, providing millions of dollars to the World Health Organization for humanitarian efforts and for the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI, for vaccine developments and encouraging countries to step up their efforts. Nigeria has even offered 36 million naira prize money to anyone who discovers a cure for COVID-19. Meanwhile, Chinese scientists are reportedly stepping up efforts on the research and development of the vaccine against the coronavirus. Has there been enough international cooperation towards curbing the spread of COVID-19 or in finding solutions? I had a chat with retired ambassador and former ambassador to Ethiopia and the AU, Ambassador Olusegun Akinsanya, about it. Ambassador Akinsanya, thank you for speaking with us on Diplomatic Channel. Do you think the governments and international organizations are actually approaching this whole coronavirus epidemic with the urgency that it deserves?
Well, I think, for any epidemics, it behooves on governments to respond, to prevent the spread, to contain the spread. COVID-19 occurred in December last year in China. And the reports we had was that, yes, because we know the role that China is playing in Africa and the movements, and it has a lot of impact in the country, a lot of deaths, a lot of people were infected, and it started spreading to other parts of Hong Kong, Philippines, and also Japan, and of course France. They recorded quite a lot of deaths, and also a lot of people are infected. Over 68,000 people have been infected. The WHO reaction was that, yes, the government of China responded, and they have the resources, of course, they have the people, they contained a lot of people. There was massive efforts to contain it. That is a reaction by the government where it actually started. But in terms of the spread, and of course for us in Nigeria, there are also some spontaneous reactions. Well, I would say that, it happens in China. They are able to do what they are able to do, but they still need to do more.
And I know some will say, this, COVID-19 is a health issue, and they would be right in saying that. But I do believe that, if the virus could affect the performance of markets around the world, it can also affect, diplomacy at the end of the day. When you look at, the history between the US and China, the most recent history over trade issues, over intelligence gathering, and so on. And then you see the US government banning all flights coming from China, banning US citizens coming from China. You have to take a second look at that, right?
Well, this provides another opportunity to expand what divides them. And apart from being an health issue, there's no doubt that there could be some political undertones. Because anything that China does and in Africa or worldwide, it reverberates in the United States and elsewhere. So you cannot rule out those political undertones.
But do you think that African countries should actually come together, probably under the AU, and give a more joint and united response, to China and to the coronavirus, despite the relationship between China and Africa, China having established or, helped to build the AU Secretariat in Addis Ababa and now working on the Prevention Center? Should there be a more continental response to the coronavirus?
It deserves a global response because this is an epidemic that is moving fast. And this originates in a developed country with the wherewithal to be able to contain it within their country, but you don't contain the movement of peoples. And if you look at Africa in the last few years, there's been quite a lot of talk about Chinese involvement, the collaboration, the road and belts, and a lot of their policies, the development of our infrastructure. You even have settlements. Some places in Africa, if you took any flights from Ethiopia, for instance, to Equatorial Guinea or to Cameroon, be loaded with Russia, with Chinese. It's the same thing here, and they have their flights. But I think because of the role that China is now playing in Africa, and the fact that there have been a lot of people, in fact, they have settlements almost in all the places. You have Chinese markets, you have Chinese food, you have Chinese everything. So it's important that EU should respond. There must be a continental response, just like we had in the case of Ebola, to contain the spread of this epidemic.
Yeah, and you know, probably, you know, you see the efforts of individual countries, you know, trying to address this global health crisis. Nigeria, for instance, the Chinese mission here in the country has announced that it has stopped issuing visas to Nigerians who want to go to China, but you don't see the same response by the Nigerian mission in China, refusing to send, you know, the visas to Chinese who want to come to Nigeria. And you see a lot of them at the airports. I mean, since this, you know, virus has began, they're still coming in.
Well, I think it's the responses, as I said, has to be spontaneous. It has to be holistic. To include even visa issue as an interim measure, because this spread is scary. Bearing in mind that our own capacity to respond I mean, the capacity of African countries to respond varies. It varies to the economy, it varies to the capacity. But I think what is important is for us as African countries, and even Nigeria. I was happy to see the other day the health minister coming around to visit our infrastructure, what we have, the airports, the check-in, and all that. We have to do. There has to be a potpourri of many of these responses in terms of the public awareness and providing the resources, because that is very key. The resources to be able to really ensure that these controls are total, and to ensure that we also apply some of these diplomatic measures, not shunning them off, because there are quite a lot of Chinese economic interest in Nigeria. I don't think the government will be out to do that at the time that we are trying to get some loan, at the time that we are trying to get some infrastructure developments. The government will not come out openly to say we are shutting you off. But what is important is that we need to react in terms of the people's health is very important.
There are some people who say that, seeing what other countries are doing for their citizens who are in China, the US, the UK, France, Germany, evacuating their citizens, the Nigerians should also be brought back home.
I mean, if we have, we need to, that presupposes that we made adequate arrangements to quarantine them, isolate them. It has to be total in terms of control, ensuring that on arrival, they are quarantined, they are isolated so that they are not allowed to spread.
I'm wondering how, this impacts on the visa on arrival policy that's already been implemented in Nigeria for African Union citizens.
No, I think it depends on the interpretations. I was, in a way, involved in the African Union about the making a case for free movements of persons and peoples, granting visas on arrival as a general African Union policy, of which Nigeria is a staunch member. We cannot afford to say that we are going to shut out Africans. But I think the control mechanism is what we need to apply. The technology, the control in ensuring that you monitor in terms of where the person is going, who is the guardian, in granting visa. All these things are things that you can't enter Heathrow Airport and they will not ask you where you are going. They will even monitor you and ensure that when you are going back and you don't go back, you are banned from entry. I think these are some of the applications that we need to put rather than completely shutting people out.
Ambassador Olusegun Akinsanya, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much, Amara. Thank you.
When we return after the break, world leaders attend the 56th edition of the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Stay with us.